Hello, cosmonauts. Today we are going to be exploring what Reddit asked to therapists of Reddit. What's been your biggest, I know I'm not supposed to judge but holy shit moment? Answer 1. Early on in my career, while working at a community mental health center, I had a 17-year-old client that had an 18-month-old daughter and was 4.5 months pregnant when we began working together. After we built enough trust in our relationship, she disclosed that she had been repeatedly raped by her father for the past 3 years. He had sole custody of her because her mom suffered from drug addiction and had her parental rights terminated. She reported to him to the local police, small town. However, they were friendly with her father and didn't believe her. They told her they would only follow through with a report if she would detail her sexual assaults with her father present, stating that if she could not do that, they would know she was lying. Her biggest fears were that her children were biologically her father's. She would not get a DNA test because she didn't want to look at them or love them differently. I made several reports to several authorities that declined to investigate or remove her from the home. In the end, my supervisor and I worked our asses off to get her connected with a very thorough and helpful sexual assault agency in another state. My agency and the new agency split the cost to get her there, settled, and safe. She was 18 years old by this time. I still think about her 20 years later and hope she's okay. Answer 2. I had a preteen client whose guardian kept requesting progress notes to see how they've been doing. It's against clinic policy for clients and parents, guardians, to have access to the notes. They're allowed to have access to everything else though. The client was very defiant to everyone, but was a wonderful kid throughout their treatment with me. When I met both with the guardian and parent, who both insisted on knowing everything about the kid, everything started making sense. Once the parent requested to switch therapists, only because I declined their request to the notes, I knew how unhealthy the family dynamics were. I felt bad for the kid because they were opening up more about the family dynamics and how they impacted them. We had a good therapeutic relationship. Answer 3. A lovely teen girl was brought to her first appointment with me by her dad. Her mom had, as diplomatically as he could spell it out to me, recently up and left the family to go live some selfish new age lifestyle with a Reiki healer, just abandoned him with 2 kids to raise solo, and he was doing his best for them. Therapy was the daughter's idea. She had been having troubling, intrusive thoughts lately about school shootings, like how to plan and execute one. And these thoughts were upsetting to her and she did not want to act on them. I can still picture how scared and sad she looked telling me this. I just wanted to wrap her in my arms, but instead, I offered so much praise and encouragement for her seeking help and trusting me with this information. She also met most of the diagnostic criteria for onset of a schizoaffective disorder. We pulled Dad into session, caught him up, explained the most urgent part of the plan. He was going to take her for a full eval with a great psychiatrist colleague of mine who understood the situation and was going to get her in stat. Daughter seemed relieved. Dad seemed relieved. We scheduled time to talk soon. Well, Mom woke up from whatever festival ditch she had passed out in to angrily call my office and flip out on me. How dare I? Am I trying to poison her child with pharmaceuticals? Did I even draw her blood and check her vitamin levels? Do I want a bad Google review or worse yet, a warrant issued for my arrest? Do I even understand herbal supplements? I need to stop now because my head hurts remembering all of this. Answer 4. Work as a mental health counselor. I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist at a middle school, ages 11 to 14. I never judge any of the kids' actions, but some of these parents though. I have had kids literally tell me they're suicidal and then I have to call their parent who is effectively annoyed that they have to take their kid to get assessed. I also had a kid in the past whose parent was about to move across country for some woman they met on the internet and knew for 2 months. Some scary stuff. Someone answer. When I was in college, one of my younger sisters was suicidal. I had no idea until about a year ago any of this happened. She texted a friend, bye for good, and friend said, nope, I'm telling my dad. The dad calls my parents. Cue my narcissistic, emotionally immature mother. She sits next to my sister and starts singing Firework by Katy Perry. And that's it. That's the conversation my mother had with my sister after finding out she wanted to yeet herself out of existence. Mom never took her to therapy even when my sister asked, saying, you have nothing to go to therapy for. Eventually, my sister wrote a note saying how badly she needed help because talking wasn't getting anywhere. And I think my mom eventually, begrudgingly, took my sister to get help. Fuck my mom. But don't actually fuck her. She doesn't deserve that loss. Answer 5. I worked with a teenager who was struggling with eating disorders, to the point she'd been hospitalized for organ damage at one point a few months before. I went to dinner with the girl and her mother. Her mom spent the entire dinner counting the individual pieces of rice she, the mom, was eating so she could accurately count the calories she consumed. I asked the mom to stop and she just stared at me and asked why she would do that because she had to watch her figure. I wonder where the 15-year-old got her eating disorder from. Answer 6. Had a patient in a group ask for advice because she was feeling pressured into sex she really didn't want to have. A friend had traveled 2 hours to see her and gotten a hotel room for them. The group heard her out, asked questions, and the consensus was something to the effect of, "Yeah, you probably owe it to him." It remains one of the only times I've dropped any effort at experiential Socratic questioning and just flatly told people absolutely not. Answer 7. Used to work in an acute child psych ward. Saw a lot of angry preteen elementary, think 8 to 12 mostly boys, and most often than not, parents treated the kid really harshly and were shocked this only made the kid worse. Also worked in an area where they did not want to hear their old school parenting could be a problem. Had one dad who said, "Well, yeah, I will spank him," 11-year-old son. When he gets angry, "Look, I know everyone nowadays doesn't like that, but I was spanked my whole life and I turned out fine. It took my entire ability to bite my tongue and not to say, 'Sir, you just got out of prison 3 months ago after serving 5 years for a violent felony.'" Answer 8. Not a therapist, but was a social worker. I worked with adults with developmental disabilities, ID now. A mother of one of my clients asked, "Why do I bother involving her son in activities?" Her son was dropped on the state's doorstep at the age of 3. Her son was 43 when he was my client. He delighted in and responded quite well to joining activities. It was another soul-crushing moment in the field. So many days of driving home crying and borderline alcoholism to numb the pain ended my almost 8 years in that field of work. Answer 9. Just found out my almost 6-year-old daughter has been being sexually abused by her father. Looking back on her behaviors, which everyone kept telling me were developmentally okay. It's been happening at least since she was 18 months old. Not surprisingly when overnight visits started. She loves the shit out of him, like obsessively so. Luckily, we got a CPS case opened a couple months ago and had a great caseworker. They now only have supervised by a professional visits. He's still fighting me in court, and I don't know what's going to happen. But my daughter keeps saying she misses him and wants to be able to be at his house and spend the night again. Shit's fucked. Answer 10. I evaluated a child and had to testify in family court. During the court session, I learned that the mother had rented her oldest daughter to her friends when the daughter was 15 to 17. The mother told the daughter she had to do it, otherwise her siblings would be homeless and hungry. Mother used most of the money for drugs. Father pays rents and brings grocery every week because he knew mother didn't have money. Custody was 50-50 when this was happening. The judge did not terminate the mother's parental rights, and mother got supervised weekend visits. The judge said it wasn't clear the mother's intention was for her friends to rape the daughter, so she wasn't going to terminate the mother's parental rights. She went on about the importance of children having a mother in their lives. Till this day, I judge both the mother and the judge. Hey you, if you enjoying the video, subscribe for more histories. Answer 11. As an intern, I had a couple where the woman was chastising the man because his mother is in an abusive cult that tortures children. Mormon. The guy had excommunicated and doesn't interact with his parents and hasn't for years. She thought this is a good reason to not let him parent his children, like he's not allowed to go out on his own with them because his parents are Mormon. She says she's worried that he will let his mother kidnap her kids and was asking me for support for her beliefs. She was also just calling him names. It was weird. The whole time he's like, "I don't even talk to my parents and I love my kids." In the end, she said, "I guess I'm just a bitch, aren't I?" Looking at me as if to get my reaction, and I accidentally blurted out, "Your words, not mine. Whoops." Answer 12. I've seen and heard a lot as a therapist. However, my holy shit moments never come from what my clients say or do. It's from what their families say, do. I have had 2 clients that were victims of factitious disorder imposed on another, better known as Munchausen by proxy syndrome. Those mothers surprised me repeatedly. The lengths they would go to keep their child sick and to try to convince medical professionals that their child was sick was so extreme. The most insane part is they fully believed the delusion despite numerous professionals stating their child was not sick. Answer 13. For the most part, I am able to continue having unconditional positive regard for my clients. I don't judge because they showed up, are talking about it, and want to better themselves. Their families, friends, partners. However, I am totally judging. Some people are just cruel and not good, but those people would never end up in my office to begin with. I think that's the difference and the privilege I have as a private practice therapist, though. I'm sure most of the stories on here will be from people who are working with populations that are mandated to go to therapy for one reason or another. Answer 14. I had this client tell me, They were afraid to move forward in their relationship because they thought their partner might become a secret vampire. They were worried that one day their partner would literally start sucking blood. It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. The things people come up with when they're feeling stressed. I totally get it. Anxiety can make your brain go wild. I helped them sort through it, and they ended up realizing they were just projecting fears from an old horror movie. Still, that was one of those did I just hear that right moment for me. Answer 15. I'm not a therapist, but I schedule first-time therapy appointments. I had this moment a few years back when the parent of a 4-year-old child told me that they wanted to go right to medication and bypass therapy because they just didn't have the time. They also wanted to know if we would use charitable funds to pay for services in the kids' school. Typically, I would not judge a parent for this, but seeing as how the other parent's name and face were plastered everywhere around town as they were running for an unpaid political position while living in a $1 million home, I went ahead and judged the shit out of them. I am sure you can guess the party affiliation, the one that promotes family values. Answer 16. Have worked in acute psych for the last 18 years and 25 years in the field. I have heard so much from so many people. The only real judgment I have of anyone these days is whether or not they are dangerous to be around. And if they are, I do have some strong opinions. Judgment is a funny thing. A person has to believe their perspective in some way is the correct right one to have. As far as I can tell, we're all just guessing at what it means to be a human being trying to live a meaningful and fulfilling existence, created, raised, and surrounded by other human beings. Answer 17. I'm not a therapist, but I worked as an RA, essentially a psych tech, at a mental health treatment center for about a year before moving on to a different area of healthcare. We had a sex addiction program, and many of the clients' past actions, behaviors were pretty hard to stomach. One man cheated on their wife with his ostensible best friend's teenage daughter while he himself had teenage children. Another frequently brought escorts into his home while his children were home. One man had sex with animals. Another had been caught with child pornography. It's not so much that I judge them per se, but many of these stories engender sort of an existential dread, as in, wow, the darkness of the human condition runs deep. This could have happened to me or someone I know. It could be difficult to cope with. Many of clients were also extremely unpleasant to be around in terms of their personality, domineering sorts, obsessiveness, terrible boundaries, no emotion, inappropriate emotion, manipulation, anger, irritability, compulsiveness. You name it. Takes a lot of understanding and compassion to support them through it all. Not always easy, but many of them had extremely traumatic pasts that made empathy easier to find. Commonly, they had experienced horrific sexual abuse themselves. In one case, a client was repeatedly raped by his brother throughout childhood, while his parents knew all about it and did nothing. His mother even walked in the room during an assault and simply turned around and left. These are the types of things the clients dealt with. I think people who make a career in mental health are fucking heroes, but I could not do it long term. It's a tragic reflection of our society that most people working in it do it for pennies. Answer 18. Animal abuse. Not a therapist, but a nurse at a mental health facility. For a time, we were taking patients as young as 6. We had this one girl who was 7. She apparently came from a very neglectful, probably abusive situation. She was adopted by a very nice family at age 3. And she was absolutely adorable. Her parents brought her in because they found out she had been killing neighbors' pets. She brought home a kitten she had killed, poked its eyes out, and stuffed candy in the empty sockets. After several psychiatrists consulted on the case, the consensus was that she should be placed in an institution for life. Just heartbreaking on so many levels. No idea what happened after because we were not a long-term facility. Answer 19. I am not a therapist but worked at a primary school, and we were all responsible for safeguarding. I worked in first aid and saw a lot of kids. One day, I had this girl, she was 8, complaining a tummy pain. I sat her with me and get her some water to monitor her. I asked her how long it had been hurting and if anything else felt poorly. She said it hurts when she pees, and she has some blood in her knickers. I instantly thought very young, starter, rare, but not unheard of. I asked if it's happened before. She said yes, and it always happens after her brother plays with her. Instant alarm bells. I get the safeguarding lead and report my concerns. Turns out the brother repeatedly raped her, and she was so small and he was not gentle, she bleed every time. Her mother knew and encouraged it. Answer 20. For me, it was more of a series of moments. I can't help but to feel some kind of way when a parent brings me their teenager who is suicidal and/or depressed and clearly does not care, and the kid knows they don't care. I can have intellectual empathy that something happened to the parent for them to behave that way, but I really struggle when parents bring their teens to me with the intention of fixing the kid rather than providing support and guidance for the family. It crushes my soul when I see a teen who is so used to being cast aside that they don't bat an eye when the parent throws a fit, because the teen needs to be assessed for safety, suicidality, and it was an inconvenience to the parent, and it's really hard to withhold judgment in those situations. Another holy shit moment is when one of my clients openly admitted to being racist, homophobic, transphobic, sexist, etc., and he felt good about the fact that he could claim those labels. That was only one of the reasons I had to transfer him, but it sent a chill down my spine when he looked me in the eye, knowing I am a queer therapist, and proceeded to tell me all of the ways in which he hated my community. So, yeah, there have definitely been some interesting moments. Answer 21. I was the patient in this scenario, but at one point when I had been seeing my therapist for several months, she wanted to examine why being around my mother was so stressful for me. I recounted to her the story of telling my mom her son had abused me throughout most of my childhood and that I wouldn't be visiting for Christmas anymore because there was no longer a way for me to sleep behind a locked door. My mother proceeded to scream at me and call my names while I sobbed so hard I ended up puking, and then emptied all my bank accounts because I no longer deserved to go to college. She eventually put the money back about a week later and called me to tell me I had missed the very expensive present she bought me. This was a lie, she hadn't bought anything. She still pretends this never happened and cries to everyone that I never talked to her. My therapist's response was, "Jesus Christ, what the fuck?" followed by a moment of silence while she processed that. Answer 22. I had a client report she was happier than ever in her new relationship. She had a stable partner who would help provide for her son. And the best thing was, there were no awkward introductions because her son already knew him. He's her half-brother. Answer 23. Not a therapist. But years ago, I went to therapy with my then wife, now ex. She picked the therapist who was a woman, so I kind of thought anything I say is going to be met with skepticism. I know it's dumb thinking, but that's what I thought at the time. In one of the sessions, I tell the therapist about an incident that happened, which I will try to keep brief here. I was off from work and cleaning the house. I had just finished in the kitchen and was doing laundry. There were 5 kids and 2 adults living in the house. I had 4 stepchildren and my daughter was maybe a year old at the time. Anyway, there's laundry in the washer and dryer, and I had just finished folding laundry, so I was taking a break watching TV until the dryer was done. It was around noontime, and my wife comes home from work on her lunch break. I say hi to her as she walks in the living room, looks around and says, "Why haven't you dusted?" I was shocked, and she got mad because I was just sitting on the couch. I was annoyed and said, "Fine, I'll start dusting." We had a glass-top coffee table, so I got some Windex and paper towels and started cleaning. She says, "No, forget it, don't." We argue back and forth with me basically yelling, that I'll finish cleaning up. As I'm wiping the Windex off the table, I see this thick brown liquid streaming down on top of the table. It's pancake syrup that my wife is pouring out because she really doesn't want me to clean now. I look at her and say, "Are you fucking crazy?" And she rips the Windex bottle from my hands and sprays me in the eyes. After a few seconds, I feel my eyes burn, and I get up and run past my wife to go outside to the hose and rinse my face off. I look at the therapist, and she doesn't look like she believes anything I just said, and looks over at my wife and says, "Okay, what's your version of what happened?" Surprisingly, my wife says, "Well, everything he said happened, but I didn't spray him in the eyes. He's lying. I sprayed him on the neck." The therapist is now shocked and looks at my wife and says, "So that whole story is true?" My wife says, "Yeah, but I didn't spray him in the face, he's lying." The therapist asked my wife why she thought I ran outside to the hose, and my wife says she didn't know why. They go back and forth about the story, and the therapist just seems surprised by the whole thing. My wife then says, "Yeah, he's lying because I didn't spray him in the face. I sprayed him on the cheek." I'm now shocked because she just changed her story, and I pointed out to the therapist, who also mentions to my wife that she changed her story. My wife is getting pissed and is adamant that she didn't change her story. The therapist also points out that the cheek is on the face. My wife then gets really pissed off and stands up and yells at me and the therapist and storms out. I look over at the therapist and she's sitting there a bit speechless. One would think this would be the end or close to the end of the marriage, but I hung on like an idiot for probably another 10 years before finally filing for divorce. Hey you, subscribe for more histories. Answer 25. To add as a patient, not a therapist. I was going through a really terrible time at 16, and to cut a long story short, got thrown into emergency therapy to make sure I wasn't going to off myself again. After telling my story to the therapist, he said something that fundamentally changed me to this day. He said, "You don't think that you're struggling with your social life and school life because of how much you're struggling at home?" And basically mentioned the abuse and mental toll I was going through at home was why I was failing in my private school life. It was the first time I felt validated in my entire life. Answer 26. Not a therapist, but a school counselor. Early in my career, I briefly worked at a very rural elementary school. I had a high number of students that had been struggling with suicidal thoughts in the short time I had been at this school. I think all but maybe one of their parents had such explosive reactions to hearing this about their child. Very angry at them. They also did not believe in mental health services and were angry the school recommended counseling. It was awful. Answer 27. As someone who works in an alternative school with probably 80% of my clients having experienced significant trauma, I could only read a small portion of this thread. I hold a hell of a lot of heavy shit for my clients. I can only deal with so much more. My issues are with CPS. I have seen kiddos left in horrible circumstances, a couple of cans of food in the house for the whole family for a week, violence perpetrated against the kiddos with witnesses and physical evidence, homes I would not let my dog live in, sexual predators living in the home, drug paraphernalia in the home, plus lots of evidence of dealing or making of meth. Parents who knew how to present sane to the caseworkers who believed them, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Cases allowed to go on for years despite the impact on the kiddos, because the parent could pull it together long enough to get custody for a couple of months but could not hold it together long-term, etc. Legally, I have to make the calls, but it is such a waste of time and often negatively impacts the therapeutic relationship with the kiddos, who thought they finally could talk openly with someone who listens, who they could trust, but not anymore. Sorry for the run-ons. It has been a rough couple of weeks. I need a vacation, but my kiddos don't get a vacation. Answer 28. It wasn't necessarily that it was that bad, but completely caught me off guard. I was in a role where I did groups with people who worked together, and I also saw them individually. They all knew, through each other and the program they were a part of. After working with them for almost a year and heading into my final sessions with them, one of them told me that their married coworker, who was also my client, had confessed they were in love with them, wanted to leave their spouse, and wanted me to do a joint session with them. My eyes went wide because it was so unexpected. The married client had never given me any indication of those feelings, and I knew I was terminating with them both shortly. I didn't do the joint session with them, and I learned then to have a much better poker face. Answer 29. Not a therapist was in residential hospitalization for mental health for almost a full year. One of the patients, a woman in her 60s, confessed to me one day that her best sexual experience of her life was when she was 12 years old. Her grandma died, and her family adopted her grandma's dog. She learned one night that the dog performed a trick every night, something it must have learned from her grandma. She allowed the dog to do it, and some points she incorporated peanut butter. It literally makes me sick to my stomach, to this day.
That was enough for today, Cosmonaut. I'll wait for you in the next travel.